As the Vincast approaches episode 50, now is a perfect time to help the podcast grow. And you can do this in a number of different ways. A great way is to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, for example, or there are other ways, Stitcher, Player FM. And when you do subscribe, if you're a fan of the podcast, it would be great if you could rate 5 stars, ideally, and also write a great review because it does help get the podcast onto a lot of people's radars. Recently had a great review from Mitchell Harris at Fantastic Winery in country Victoria, who said that those of us who love a good wine have been after an Aussie podcast like this for a long time. So it is fantastic. Thank you so much for those kind words. Of course, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at Intrepid Wino, and the podcast as well on at the Vincast, and come to the Facebook page, facebook.com/Intrepid Wino. Now, for episode 50, as I might have mentioned a few times, my plan is to actually via Skype record listeners and having a chat about their impressions of the podcast, their experience with wine. Any kind of story would be fantastic. So if you are interested in being a part of that, I really would love to hear from you. So you can hit me up on any of those social media platforms I mentioned, or even send me an email, thevincast@gmail.com. Hello there, Vincasters, and welcome back to another episode of the Vincast. My name is James Scaresbrook, otherwise known as the Intrepid Wino, and we have had another bit of a break. I do apologise, guys, for not having any episodes to go up over the past few weeks. As I might have mentioned, I was overseas attending the Pro Wine and Vin Italy trade fairs, which was fantastic. Lots of great wine, lots of great food, and also got to catch up with some fantastic wine people. And then with Easter, it was a little bit complicated to have a guest on the podcast. So I thought when I do come back, I will come back with a bit of a bang. And so I've got a really exciting guest who has a little bit of a different background to anyone I've had on before, but is doing something really exciting, something that has really got the attention of a lot of people in the industry, and hopefully people who are just wine lovers as well. Nathan Earl has worked in television in Australia for at least 10 years, and probably worked very closely with the Chaser, for those who aren't familiar with them. Very cult show on the ABC back in the day. And he has created a show called Plonk, which is a very irreverent look at the wine industry and with lifestyle wine programs. So I had a chat with him as he is editing a second series of Plonk, and it was really fascinating. So I hope you enjoy, and see you on the other side. Nathan, thank you so much for making some time and joining me on the Vincast. Obviously, you are knee deep in editing the second series of Plonk, so I really appreciate you making some time.
Oh, thanks for the invite, James. Great to be here.
So tell me, Nathan, what was the first interaction you had with wine that made you kind of prick up your ears and kind of think, oh, there's something a bit more to this?
Well, I sort of grew up in the Hunter Valley in a wine family. My dad had been running cellar doors up there since the late 70s. But so I was sort of raised on a steady diet of Semillon and Shiraz from an early age. But I'd say sort of my first real interaction with wine was probably sitting in the car park of the Cessnock KFC drinking like a 1998 Sadler's Creek Bluegrass, a Cab Sav out of a plastic cup with a Tower Burger combo.
That's a bit of a sideways kind of moment, isn't it?
It absolutely is. You know, you grow up in that area, you work in that area, and I was working at a restaurant up in the valley, and so we used to get access to quite a lot of decent wine, but you could only really drink it, between the hours of sort of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. when you finished work. So we would be often devouring these amazing bottles of white and red wine, out of styrofoam cups at the local park or the local takeaway joint.
Mm. And so was wine a part of your family growing up? Like, were your parents, obviously coming from the Hunter Valley, obviously accessibility to wine would have been pretty easy.
It was to a degree. It was always around the house. Dad, my first memory of my father was going and visiting him at the old Hungerford Hill cellar door up in the Hunter Valley and running around there as kids, through the wine barrels and through the cellar door. And so wine was always sort of part of the family. I wouldn't say we were sort of entrenched in the industry out there because there is a difference between sort of, being a winemaker and doing what my dad did, which was sort of running the cellar door and being sort of a marketer or a salesman of wine. But it was certainly around. And when I became old enough to sort of drink, we were sort of introduced to wine, over the dinner table in a sort of fairly conventional way. And then, as you go in through the teenage years, you're constantly running under the house and stealing a bottle of Dad's red wine to take camping with you. And, consequently, I then worked in cellar doors, throughout my university days. And my brother now runs a cellar door and my mother works in a cellar door. So, yeah, we're definitely a wine family.
Yeah, and I guess sort of early on, that's where that kind of wine communication and trying to find ways to make wine accessible to visitors to a cellar door would have come pretty early on.
Oh, indeed. And I think, anybody that's worked in a cellar door, in any capacity knows that that's what it's all about. You can get people to the region and they want to buy wine. And a lot of people know or don't know what they're looking for. But unless you make the experience engaging, they're not going to part with their hard-earned dollars for a case of wine, particularly, when a case of wine can run up to, $350, $400. So, and particularly with the Hunter Valley, I mean, there's a lot of cellar doors up there. That's a lot of choice. And you really need to capture someone's imagination early on because after they've tasted, they've gone to 3, 4 or 5, heaven forbid, cellar doors in a day, their palate's shot and they really just want to get back to the bar or back onto the golf course. So how do you make that experience engaging for people? How do you engage people straight away? And how do you make? And I genuinely feel that you are more inclined to buy wine off people for whom you've had a good experience with. Obviously the wine and the quality of the wine helps, but the experience you have during the tasting and the affinity that you may have with the person who's selling it to you, that will always get you over the line. And I noticed that at cellar door time and time again. And the same could be said, for wine television programming as well. Unless you can reach out and find an engaging reason why the audience should care about the product you're selling them, there's just too much other choice out there for people to engage with.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you started working in cellar doors whilst you were studying. What did you end up studying at university?
I did. I did a communications degree, which in the late 90s was a degree you do when you couldn't think of any other degree to do.
Yeah, I think in the mid to late 2000s, psychology became that.
Oh, great! Excellent. So I have a relatively redundant communications degree from the University of New South Wales, but it wasn't until I went back and studied again as an older person, in my mid-20s, when I did a master's degree in television producing at the Australian Film, Television and Radio School in Sydney, that I sort of became engaged with a potential career. I think, I went to university at 17, and I think it's more about just giving yourself another couple of years of tap dancing where you don't have to be too grown up at that stage. But by the time I made it to afters, and that was a difficult school to even get into. I was 25 years old, and I'd done a lot of travelling, and I was ready to sort of try to find a career that I could focus on, and it ended up being television. But of course, my heart was always in the wine industry.
Yeah, understandably. So what were you doing sort of in that interim between finishing the bachelor's degree and then kind of finding, that television was a career that you might want to pursue?
It was a bit of a lost period. It was a little bit of a lost period for me, to be honest. Working sort of, lots of hospitality work, bars and restaurants. And I went over to Canada for a couple of years and worked in golf resorts over there. And
you're a golfer?
I'm an appalling golfer. Yeah. I've got a slice that's so bad it can actually whip around 180 degrees and hit me in the back of the head. So, but I think that it was important for me to have that period of time where I was a little lost, and I did a bit of traveling and I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And I eventually found my way back to the Hunter Valley, and back into cellar door. And it wasn't sort of till I came home and got back into the wine industry that it helped me sort of cement. I don't want to say by going back to the wine industry, I realized I didn't want to work in the wine industry. That's not true, but it helped me sort of focus down on, a potential career that I could have that I was hopefully good at. And, the opportunities sort of flowed after that.
But you had an interest in television. Was that something that had been with you for a while? Did you have a particular love of television growing up?
To a degree, I always remember sort of acting in plays at high school, and being right into Monty Python and Blackadder and Fawlty Towers and Yes Prime Minister and all that stuff. So I always had a sort of a passion for that sort of thing, and then sort of went, even at university, would script edit for a lot of people and make short films and things, but it didn't really occur to me that I even had that option.
Yeah.
I think growing up, in the Hunter Valley and the time you did, just because you wanted to get into television doesn't mean you could be in television. I mean, if you wanted to go into mining or hairdressing, it's a fantastic place because the opportunities there, are brilliant. But if you wanted to get into television, there's no clear way of doing it. It's not like and it's so much of it is luck and timing as well,
And you would think people would just assume that, I'm talented. Surely someone will recognize my talent and just put me on television.
Yeah, and I didn't really have any aspirations of being on screen either. My passion was always sort of behind the camera, directing and writing and producing, and so there wasn't just a clear path. You sort of, most people who get into television stumble into it by accident backwards when they're not even paying attention. And that was certainly the case for me. It took me a long time to find TV, but once I was in there, I was really focused. And the first job I got out of film school was producing The Chasers' War on Everything, which at the time was a show that was sort of buried on Friday nights at like 10 past 10 or something. Something happened in that year between sort of 2006, 2007, where The Chaser, although they had been on television for years prior to that.
I was familiar with them from CNN, and how many ends was it? I can't remember.
I think it was 4 ends.
But so I was aware of them, but I actually started watching Chasers War and Everything right from the beginning, and I remember that kind of explosion after that first year. Just going, wow.
And I think that's true. I think CNN was certainly a show, that had a lot of love within the industry, or it was popular amongst university students or sort of people who had a passion for political satire. But it was really The War on Everything, that series, those 3 seasons, that sort of broke Chaser sort of into the mainstream in many respects. And I think, it was certainly at a time too where people still actively sought out and purchased DVDs. And there was something that happened over the break between 2006, 2007, where the DVDs just sold a bucket load, and people sort of rediscovered the series on repeats and catch up. And so when we came back to do the second series in 2007, our audience had just sort of quadrupled in size, and we really were for a period of time, in my opinion anyway, the show to watch. During the week,
And I remember it got to a point. I remember seeing sort of stuff in the media or mainstream media about people, particularly obviously in Sydney, where most of it was being filmed, sort of going, "Oh, you're doing a prank, are you?"
Yeah, absolutely.
On the street coming up and like expecting it. So I remember it became a lot harder to do them.
It did, and in a weird way, that was sort of the program's ultimate downfall. And once everyone had sort of saw the guys coming, the jokes lost a bit of power because you weren't really playing a pure prank on people. There was a level of knowingness that the target was aware of, and in many ways that was particularly with the politicians. I used to do a lot of the stuff in Canberra, and we noticed after a year or two the politicians just started playing our game, really. Their strategy was to neutralise the gag by playing along, whereas in those
To be
early years,
laughing right away before they'd even said anything.
exactly, because that's not funny. Then
I'm
you
good
want to
humoured.
catch
Ha ha ha!
people.
I can take a joke.
And I think in those early days, what the guys had going for them is anonymity. No one really knew who they were or what they were up to, and so the gags were that much more awkward, because you watch these politicians or big businessmen or CEOs sort of squirm at the idea that they didn't actually understand the offer that was being presented to them. And then obviously as the years went on, and the brand grew and grew and the guys became much more well known, it did make achieving those stunts harder and harder. And we just had to, either go further afield or make them bigger or more ambitious, and to mix success, I think.
So, were you involved in a number of different elements with the Chaser?
I was to a degree. I mean, the majority of what I did was directing and producing. So there was a group of sort of two and sometimes three of us, producer directors, and we would be divvied up the various scripts that were coming up, sort of down the pipeline, and then it was our job to turn those scripts into a reality, to assess the viability of what could be achieved, and to physically work out how to do them, how to capture them, how to film them, how to sort of dial them up and make them funny. And I certainly, particularly in the early years, got lumped with all of the stunts. I didn't get the luxury of going to the studio and filming the really funny sort of sketches that the guys used to write. I was more often than not.
I was a big fan of their music parodies.
Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, they were fantastic. But more often than not, I was sitting, parked in a van in a stakeout trying to get Gretel Colleen as she exited the building, or, hiding in a stairwell at some political meeting trying to jump out and stunt John Howard. I met John Howard so many times on that show, chasing him with a Back to the Future DeLorean or shopping cart.
I remember that one. That was really funny.
Yeah. So I didn't get it. They kept me away from the studio. I was always out in the field or down in Canberra, getting hassled by the federal police.
But it's a lot of on location and trying to find the right way of shooting something. I guess it would probably be a bit different because it's all very on the fly.
It was fantastic training. Yeah, it was brilliant training, and those guys, their work ethic was so incredible that it made everybody around them work twice as hard as they would normally. And what people forget sometimes is we were filming essentially 35 to 40 minutes of television every 4 or 5 days.
Sure.
And that's a huge amount of TV to pull together at a short time. And so I think those years on the Chaser certainly gave me a great deal of experience in sort of just working out how to make it happen on the fly, run and gun, turn it around, not overthinking it too much, but also being able to adapt to problems that happen in the field. I mean, the Apex stunt is a classic example of something that was planned meticulously, and then as soon as we did it, it totally went pear-shaped. And so we just had to adapt on the fly and work out, well, how do we still make this funny? How do we still execute the joke we want to execute? To varying degrees of success, I guess.
There were, at that time was sort of a bit of a cultural zeitgeist as far as Australian comedy, I think, because that was around about when Chris Lilly was starting to come onto the scene as well, and so there seemed to be this real energy behind local content as far as, particularly in terms of comedy, which kind of, I felt like it after the Chaser finished, it went off the rails a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think it was a really interesting time at the ABC in those mid-noughties.
I always look forward to Wednesday night on ABC. It was just the best, like 2 hours, I think it was, of really awesome content.
Well, I think ABC was buoyed off the success of Kath and Kim. They developed this great spin-off series which did really well, and then all of a sudden you started seeing Double the Fist and The Chaser and The Gruen Transfer, Summer Heights High and We Can Be Heroes, obviously. And so there was a real swagger and confidence around the ABC at that time that they were sort of creating innovative new programming, and then as all these things do, they ebb and flow depending on your sort of taste. And perhaps post the war and everything, there may have been perhaps a more safe type of programming being made at the ABC. But now that ABC Two clearly is up and running too, though I think the last year they've
Makes
come
a
out with
big
some really
difference. Like
clever shows.
I know that what like something that comedians always say is that a big difference as far as content being created, whether it's stand-up comedy or whether it's televised comedy shows, it depends on what side of politics is in power, and I think that because it was John Howard in government, and then the left-ish came into power, there was kind of like a yeah. And now in the last few years with Tony Abbott, all of a sudden comedy's kind of come back into the fore again.
I mean, that could be true. I mean, I think it's always easier when comedically, particularly if you're making a show that has sort of social or political elements to it. It's always more easy if you have a great antagonist,
Yeah.
and Tony Abbott is a great antagonist. John Howard was a great antagonist. But I think, buffoonery and political mischievous, is prevalent in both parties. And I think, Kevin Rudd was a great antagonist as well to some degree. But I think what changes the the comedic landscape, the ABC more, is just who's in charge and who's willing to take risks.
Sure.
It's very easy to recommission Chris Lilly show after Chris Lilly show. But the first person to commission a Chris Lilly show, that had real guts. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And so it's about being willing to fail. And it's about being willing to commission 10 comedy shows for just to pull a number out of the air and know that 6 of them won't connect with an audience. But to find the 4 that do, you need to make the 10. And when you're just recommissioning programming from the same faces doing the same type of programming, although those faces may be great and that programming might be great, doesn't necessarily make for the most interesting pool with which to find and develop new talent. And definitely, programs like the Fresh Blood campaign, which ABC2 really got behind in the last year or so, that's digging up sort of the next generation of comedians. But I think, it does take real drive and guts at the top to sort of say, no, let's just not make the safe bet this year. Let's actually give all the people that usually get their shows up a year off, and let's just commission 8 new shows from these people and hope that we find the next Chaser and the next Sean McAuliffe, because, they're out there, and if we don't provide them with any opportunities, they'll just go into, advertising thing.
I think probably one of the really interesting things about what's happened, certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, is with the online space being so much more visible to an audience, and it's what appears to be much easier to kind of generate some content, in a very lo-fi way, and build an audience that can then very easily be adapted into a more mainstream media format. Like the birth of YouTube, I guess, and the growth of YouTube and the legitimacy of it has, for example, changed the whole landscape of media. And people are watching media on so many different devices and different platforms now that it's sort of. Do you feel like there is a huge democratization of media?
Oh, absolutely. I think democratization is a great word because, getting down to brass tacks, it does democratize the media, but it also democratizes success and talent and opportunity. In the end of the day, you don't need to rely on a sort of antiquated rating system or nepotism to get your show up. The numbers speak for themselves. The reach speaks for themselves. And there's nowhere to hide. A great show potentially will find a wide audience. And then it also allows for a lot of programming that may have never seen the light of day to just get out there and have a go. I mean, I show ran a web series called The Great Crusade a few years ago, which was sort of a partnership between Qantas and Tourism New Zealand. But we made it into this 21-part comedy series about this squash journalist who was travelling around New Zealand trying to cover the Rugby World Cup. And we had a tremendous amount of creative control and freedom on that show. And it allowed us to make that many episodes. We were essentially turning an episode around a day in terms of writing it and shooting it, cutting it and uploading it, all while travelling on the road around New Zealand following the wallabies around. And I think if we'd had to go through the normal processes of getting scripts approved and rough cuts approved and fine cuts approved and signing off with the client and the agency and the network, just never would have been done. We would have made 4 episodes instead of 21. And quite more often than not, when you get that much feedback that you are contractually obliged to adhere to, it waters the content down to a point where it actually appeals to nobody, because everybody has a different opinion on what joke's funny, and more often than not, they'll take the safe road. And so it smooths the sharp edges off the comedy, and you stop making a show. And I think this is the other thing too. The word niche is not a dirty word. You look at great comedy shows like Eastbound and Down or Portlandia, they're not trying to be the next Big Bang Theory, or they know they're a niche program and they're talking to their audience and they're unapologetic about that. And the audience in turn rewards them with loyalty, with great word of mouth. And I think that's where, hopefully Australian comedy will head, as more avenues for distribution become available, whether it be through YouTube or through Vimeo. Amazon and Yahoo are obviously in that space now, and then now the birth of the sort of streaming service, whether it be Netflix or Stan or Presto, are all getting into that space as well. That you still need money to make programming, and finding that money and cobbling that money together is not going to become easier. In fact, it's going to become harder because you've got more people at the trough trying to fight for the same amount of dollars. But what it does force people to do is think a little bit more frugally about how to make programming and make sure every dollar they find or raise is put on the screen.
Oh, I've always found that like shows that I love, particularly early on, were just so great because they had to be so much more creative, particularly in terms of their storytelling and character development, that when they got a big following and then their budgets went up, something then kind of went missing. They went for more spectacle and rather than the more organic kind of way they were trying to communicate with their audience.
Well, you don't need to put lipstick on that pig then, do you? I mean, look at Fawlty Towers. Like that show still endures, 30 odd years later. And that was made on the smell of an oily rag. You can see the sets falling apart during the shoot.
Star Trek.
Star Trek, but once you capture the sort of zeitgeist of the audience you're talking to, and the tone of the show, and you're not trying to be a show for everybody, it will endure because it's handed down. When I was at high school, I had great drama teachers that said, oh, you should check out, they gave me a VHS of Blackadder and I was hooked, or some old Monty Python records, and so, it's passed down from generation to generation, great comedy, much like the Goon Show was, in its day. And I'm sure we'll pass down our generation, what we think was the great comedies of our generation to, our kids.
One of the big ones for me when I was young was the Goodies. And I'll happily go back and watch episodes of the Goodies now and then go, yeah, it's sort of dated to that period of the 70s. It's not like Monty Python where, like on Flying Circus or their movies, there's a lot of period type stuff, and a lot of time they're sort of wearing suits and stuff like that. Whereas you look at some of the stuff that Bill Oddie was wearing on the Goodies and go, oh my God. But at the same time, the comedy of it, the genius is still very timeless.
Oh, indeed, because it's great slapstick comedy. You totally appeal, you gravitate to those characters. They're wonderful buffoons, I mean, there's elements of the Goodies in Plonk to a degree, and the Goodies it's a fantastic time capsule. I love the Goodies. I love how kitsch it sort of has become now. I love that it feels dated. It's fantastic.
Like it's kind of almost hipster wearing a Goodies t-shirt.
Oh, yeah, exactly. Exactly, and it's a wonderful historical document for looking back at, the sexual politics of its time, the fashion, the landscape, what people were watching, what people were laughing at.
All the apartheid episodes set in South Africa.
Exactly, and they're unbelievably racist by today's standards, but in the context, it's a fascinating historical document, and still sort of funny and enjoyable in many ways. You can never eat a black pudding again, can you? If you've seen an episode of The Goodies,
not without saying Eki Thump.
Indeed. And I think there is a tendency to sort of historically revise a lot of great comedies, and I think the idea is just looking at them in the context of their time, in the same way a great album, a great music, a piece of music. You've got to look back at the politics of its day to understand the lyrics of bands from the 60s and 70s and 80s.
So after The Chaser, you continued to work in various capacities in the television industry. Did you still sort of have much contact with the Chaser guys at all?
Yeah, I did actually. I've sort of worked with those guys on and off for the best part of 10 years now in some capacities. I did a 2-series of a show with Lawrence Leung, the comedian Lawrence Leung. That was co-produced with the Chaser Broadcasting. Obviously Chris.
Choose Your Own Adventure?
Choose Your Own Adventure, yeah, and Unbelievable.
Yeah, I missed that one. I think that was when I was overseas.
Yeah, so I've always worked, and obviously I've just done a couple of years with those guys on a show called The Checkout on the ABC as well. So we've all remained friends, and we work together in various capacities. I did the first series of Balls of Steel with Craig Rucastle, and he was just in another little pilot we shot a few months ago. And Andrew Hansen has always popped up in some of my shows, and he'll pop up again in series 2 of Plonks. So. Yeah, no, we're great friends, and they're a wonderfully collaborative, creative group of guys that have gone on from strength to strength, and they're diversifying their brand as well. Through the Giant Dwarf brand, they've got an amazing theatre, Giant Dwarf Theatre down here in Sydney, where they put on, incredible events every night, whether they be spoken word events or comedy shows or literature Q&A sessions. So. Yeah, no, they're a good bunch of people, but it was sort of time to try my hand at my own show just to see if I could do it.
Yeah, so tell me how you came up with the concept of Plonk.
Well, it sort of had a long gestation period, to be honest. It sort of goes back to film school, 2005. I'd met Josh Tyler, who obviously plays Josh in the show, at film school. He was doing a writing degree and I was doing a producing degree. And he grew up in the Barossa. I grew up in the Hunter Valley. So we would quite regularly buy a bunch of clean skins and get pissed and chat about what was right and what was wrong with the television industry. But I always had grand dreams of making a very serious wine show. But I knew I wanted it to be a little bit, Jamie Oliver was big at the time, that pucker tucker, more relaxed attitude. And I couldn't understand why we couldn't take that sort of Jamie Oliver approach
sort of
to wine.
A boyish, sexy style of
instead of interviewing the chef about his wine in the restaurant, why aren't you sitting out the back of the loading dock on some milk crates, drinking the wine from the wine? I just wanted to sort of humanise wine shows a little bit, and then it just sort of fell by the wayside and everyone got busy, and then 9 years later I decided to dig it out of the drawer again. I was working on a television show down in Melbourne, which I ended up leaving prematurely. Actually, I was fired from that show, so I ended up having 6 weeks off, quote unquote. So I came home. I went back to the Hunter Valley and hung out with my dad and sort of refound my love for that industry, and then refound my love for that idea. What's wine? There are some great wine shows out there, some horrible wine shows out there, but I just thought there's got to be another way of doing it, another way of reaching out to the types of people who I used to see come into the cellar door every day. And winemakers themselves have a fantastic sense of humour.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's some real characters, and I know that within the industry, we always talk about that. And there's sort of legendary stories about groups of winemakers going to the US and the Americans going, "Oh my God, these guys are so much fun to be around," and you don't see that being translated to the wider public. You know, you go to wineries' websites and they're very lovely. They're trying to evoke an emotion, but at the same time, sort of keep the sort of, I don't know, not quite the prestige, but the premium nature, and not for it to be sort of as larrikin and kind of you know, just fun kind of thing.
And I understand why they do that too. I understand why a lot of wine marketing is sanitized to a way, because you're dealing with a premium product in most respects, an aspirational product in many respects. But I think as the sort of cultural shift has occurred and wine has become the sort of dominant alcoholic drink of choice for Australians over beer, you know, that level of aspiration has changed, and it becomes more about a place and a drink. You get together with mates and you go up to Jazz in the Vines, or you go to a Moonlight Cinema, or you get together.
End of last year, I went up to Mitchelton and saw Jimmy Barnes with my dad.
Yeah, indeed. And so it becomes less about this aspirational product that is only accessible to someone who, you know, wears a lot of paisley, you know, and drives a Lexus and plays golf. But it becomes more about the people you're with, the food you're eating, the music you're listening to, the locations you're going to. And I think, you know, as the way we consume wine has changed, I think so too should be the way in which we present wine. And I absolutely agree that there is a place for that slightly more elitist type of wine programming, because there is, you know, a slightly elitist consumer out there. But there is also a consumer who's me and my mates and everyone I know, who just wants to get together and go up to Mudgee for the weekend, or, you know, down to the Mornington and just have a great time, whether it be wrapped around an event or not. And they're passionate about learning about wine. You know?
I think that has a lot to do with the like a generational thing, and I really think that it's accessibility in terms of people having accessible access to be able to go to wine regions now. You know, there's so many more wineries with cellar doors. Wine tourism is a much bigger thing than it was in the past. But with the accessibility to information, as far as, you know, websites and stuff like that, you know, people under the age of maybe 40-ish are much more in contact and with winemakers, with wine regions, and the reality of that. And so I think that's sort of broken down barriers a lot, and so people don't have that kind of us and them mentality.
I agree. I think they've humanised the wine industry a lot in the last decade. And I think just in the same way that wearing the top garish clothing labels has become out of fashion, it's more now about obscure, cool clothing that no one knows where you got. I think wine's the same way. You know, you don't need to be just a member of, you know, Penfolds and, you know, those other big wine companies anymore. It's more fun to go out and find some awesome niche little winery in the Adelaide Hills or McLaren Vale and then tell your mates about it, because they've got no idea. They've never seen that varietal before. They've never heard of that winery before. And so then there becomes a really interesting exclusivity about it. It's more about, you know, the same with television.
The same
you
way,
know,
exactly. I was just thinking the same thing.
It's niche.
You know, when you've got so many more networks over in the US, like particularly in terms of cable, and now Netflix generating their own content, even Amazon doing it. With all those little niches, it's almost like, you know, I've seen people make jokes about I actually pretend like I have watched Breaking Bad because I just got so sick of people saying, "You haven't seen Breaking Bad? What's wrong with you?" I think the same thing is happening with wine.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's become quite trendy to know about some obscure little British drama or comedy or whatever, and to tell your friends about it. As
You don't know
opposed to
Key and Peele.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because you can feel a little superior about that too, that they haven't caught it on Foxtel or whatever. And that's just, I think it's the same with wine too. It becomes this great competitive drive amongst a network of friends.
Yeah, and the same thing with venues as well, like bars and restaurants. Like, oh, you don't know that? Oh my god!
Oh yeah, it doesn't even have a sign on the door.
Or the new groovy ingredient. Like, you haven't had kale?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think that's so true. I think that's exactly what's happening in the wine. I think it's a great thing too because it encourages people to dig a little deeper, to search a little harder, to spend more quality time with the winemaker, and to become loyal to a broader range of wineries and wine regions from the top down.
So were all for all those reasons? Is that sort of why you came up with the concept of Plonk?
A little bit. I mean, I just wanted it to be fun. Like I knew there was a show about the ridiculousness of the wine region, but I knew that the joke couldn't be on the wine industry because it's too easy. It's too safe just to pick on the pompous. Like everybody knows that the wine industry has pomposity to it and ridiculous to it, as any industry does. And to me, that just felt out like it was just pointing out the bloody obvious. Whereas if you could wrap it in some sort of self-defamatory way, and for me, it was television because I understand how to make television. I know the heartache and pain that goes into making television. I know how quickly it can all fall off the rails. So you're essentially just using the wine industry to cloak the hidden satire, which is television making and the absurdity of particular lifestyle programming in particular. And
Yeah,
it sort
yeah,
of served
absolutely.
both masters then by proving to the wine makers that the gag that they weren't the gag, they were just the facilitators of the gag. It opened all these doors to us, and it provided us with, for my money, a much more interesting way of satirizing sort of both industries, really, but doing it in a really lovable way. A lot of the chaser programming, was quite edgy and a bit little dark and a bit cynical. But what I love about Plonk is it wears its heart on its sleeve. It's a very earnest show. It's the little show that's just trying to make it. And I love the sort of naivety of it in a way. I think people end up sort of rooting for Plonk to just try to get through the day without stuffing up. And I think it makes it more endearing to watch.
So it's a pretty interesting concept, the idea of making a show about a show that I'm guessing doesn't exist.
That's right.
Um, but sort of what you're talking about, the idea behind the show, I think it's really successful. You watch each episode, and the start of each episode pretty much is the same, where you've got Chris, obviously from the Chaser background, playing up on his own character. I guess he's playing a caricature of himself.
Mm.
We use like having a different kind of lifestyle program style thing, but it's they're kind of fake outtakes, which is hilarious. But then each episode, at least in the first series, as you're going through a number of different regions in New South Wales, you are kind of looking at a slightly different element. You've got one episode where Chris kind of gets sick of the pomposity of wine and goes, "Oh, I'm going to have a, like that typical sea change thing. I'm going to get touch with my, the land and ends up making cheese and then kind of goes, oh, this is kind of a bit bullshit, isn't it?" And then, another episode where you've got the wine options thing and Josh kind of, you've got this character playing a wine blogger, which, is very much, a cultural phenomena of the last 5 years of wine. I love that way of as you say, kind of breaking down barriers, breaking down the image and making things a bit fun. But at the end of the day, sort of saying, look, it's all just silly. It's all, it's all bullshit, really.
Yeah, and a lot of that tone comes from the wine industry itself. I mean, we don't want to live in a glass bubble when we're making this show. This is a show that lives and dies off the back of the embrace of the wine industry. And if the people who we are, you know, no, I was going to say satirizing, but we're actually not satirizing them. We're satirizing ourselves. If the people that are good enough to let us take the mickey out of them, if they don't get behind the idea and they don't genuinely believe that it's a good thing for the industry, they're not going to share it. They're not going to talk about it or tweet about it or put it on their Facebook page and encourage people to watch it. And so,
And he did a good job getting Stuart McGill to make fun of himself that way.
Yeah, well, geez, that was a challenge. That's quite hard to get Stu. He's a very busy man. He's very hard to keep on track. So we were really lucky to get Stu on that. And he's been a great supporter of the show as well. But a lot of the storylines have come directly from the industry themselves or directly from the people involved. But, before we write an episode, yes, it's hard to believe they are written. But, we spend a bit of time in the regions. We get to know the winemakers. We find out who might want to play with us and who doesn't, and then we pitch them for ideas. We run the ideas past them, and and they might say, oh, look, that doesn't ring true to me, but if you change this, this, and this, that's spot on. And so there's a lot of interplay between the people who are in the show and us to make sure that the storylines and the set pieces ring true and have an air of accuracy about them.
And that level of collaboration is only going to serve to make the story more honest and accessible for people within the industry, but also people not in the industry.
Well, it's forcing us to think outside the square a little bit and not just write from outside. And it's also allowing the storylines for people to relate to them. For something relatable to have happened to them, or for them to have a similar storyline, and that way they can relate to the show and therefore hopefully relate to the characters. If you don't like the characters or you can't relate to the characters, you're not gonna like the show. But everybody's knows a Chris type or has worked with a Josh type or has a Nathan type in their family.
And it's familiar with that kind of dynamic of the three of you kind of traveling around and you're playing the character, just trying to keep everything going.
Yeah, indeed. And I think you can translate that relationship to any industry, to any scenario, to any family to some degrees. There are those archetypes everywhere you look. So we're just wrapping them in the pressure bubble of making a wine show that they think is going really well, and it's not. And hopefully that's where we squeeze the best comedy out of it.
So the first series is all online. You can find it on YouTube and the links through. There's a Facebook page, and I think someone said to me yesterday that they saw it on iView.
It might be. Oh, I don't know. I better check on that.
They might have been misremembering, but
where you will be able to see the first series, the half-hour episodes will eventually be on Stan in the next couple of months. So you'll be able to see the first series on Stan before we launch the second series on Stan in June.
So when you say half-hour episodes, because the online ones are about 10 minutes or so?
Yeah, they're about 10 to 15 minutes each. So the half hours was sort of, once, we were lucky enough for the show to have gotten a run on Channel 10 and Channel 11, what we did is we went back into those webisodes and we retweaked them and stitched them together into sort of 3 half hours.
Oh, okay.
So it's the same sort of content, basically. I mean, if you want to watch them now, you should go to a YouTube page, the Plonk YouTube page, and just watch the 5 webisodes, and then and then 6 half-hour episodes will be launched on Stan in June, and then throughout the rest of the year, it'll be launched on sort of the same sort of media platforms as we did last time, with a web series coming, not long after that.
And is that going to incorporate what you were filming for, I guess, the second series in South Australia?
Yeah, it's all the South Australian series. So, we go to the Barossa, McLaren Vale, Adelaide Hills, Coonawarra, Clare. It's really fun. So we shot down there for 8 weeks. It was a really massive effort by the team to get it all done. And so I'm currently in post-production on that now, trying to edit it together in some way that makes sense.
But I guess if people kind of want to get an idea about some of the stuff they can expect, you can jump onto certainly the Instagram account.
Or our Facebook. And if you subscribe and like the Facebook page and YouTube pages, you'll get updates of, when the second series is coming down the pipeline and, behind the scenes content and things like that. And just join the sort of Plonk universe, really. It's great to sort of have a loyal little fan base on our Facebook and YouTube pages. And, the more people that share that page, hopefully the bigger audience will be ready to watch season 2 when it comes out.
And I know that for the first series, you got support from Tourism New South Wales. Is that the
That's right. Yeah,
organisation? And then
Destination New South Wales.
same sort of thing for the second with South Australia.
To a degree, yeah. Obviously, it's a bigger show. It's a bigger landscape. We've got more episodes, so we got some generous support from South Australian Tourism Commission. But this time round, our principal sponsor has been Screen Australia, which is fantastic. So
Oh
it's
wow!
so we're sort of now straddling that weird hybrid between a sort of commercial tourism venture and sort of a traditional television funding model through Screen Australia. Although they were great, we got some funding through a multi-platform drama grant with those guys, which really pushes forward the idea of creating content not just for television but for web as well.
Mm-hmm.
So they were lucky enough. We were lucky enough for them to have seen the first series of Plonk and how it sort of lived as a web series and a TV show. And so, they generously jumped on board to help the Tourism Commission sort of fund the show.
Yeah. And you are also going out on the road with Wine Communicators Australia. With some sort of seminar type stuff.
Oh, yes, we are. This is great. I'm really excited about it. In fact, that's what I'm meant to be doing today. I'm meant to be writing this bloody lecture. But what are the dates? Hang on. Oh, it's the 20. Oh, okay. So it's the end of, Jesus, this month. So 21st, 22nd and 23rd of April. The Plonk guys, me, Josh and Chris, will be doing a 1-hour lecture in Adelaide, Melbourne and Sydney, respectively, for the Wine Communicators of Australia peeps. It's a lecture about, the birth of Plonk, and we'll show some clips and we'll talk about the second series and, maybe show a few sneak peek bits and pieces of the second series to the crowd there. And, yeah, it's going to be great. The WCA are fantastic people and, it's just a good excuse for a bunch of people to get together and talk about the way in which wine is communicated in this country, spoken about, our attitude that the media has to wine and, hopefully talking about some different and interesting ways in which we can sort of get the message out there that, Australia...
I think it's great that they actually are embracing a different medium with which to connect with an audience.
Yeah, for years and years, there was the same sort of wine advertising. Very pretty girl, very pretty guy, driving car you can't afford, walking through the vines, rubbing her hands in a linen dress and eating a pulled pork sandwich.
Being chased by a rabbit.
Being chased by a rabbit or a yarn or whatever. And look, that sort of advertising is fantastic. It looks amazing. It's beautiful. But to me, more often than not, it sort of says, go away. This industry is not for you. You could never get a girlfriend this hot. You could never afford this car. And therefore, you will never be embraced by this wine. Mm. And I think, what Plonk does is it's the antithesis of that, isn't it? It says, no, it's for everybody. It's fun. It's getting together with your mates. And it's being not afraid to just say you don't know. I don't know.
And laugh at yourself and laugh at the situation.
Because it's fun. It's just fun going out there and trying wine and working out what you like and what you don't like. There's no right or wrong to wine. There just isn't, And
it's funny. I wish I could go back sort of 10 years or so, particularly when I started working in a cellar door in the Yarra Valley, and say to myself, get over it. Do you know what? Like, stop kind of, just get rid of the pretension. Just, people are just out to have fun. Just embrace that.
Yeah, and you see it too. You see these people walk in with the James Halliday books and they're just buying cases of wine so they could tick it off because someone said that this is good, as opposed to just saying, oh, actually, this is a really lovely wine and my girlfriend really likes this wine and we can drink this with dinner tonight, and, just having a bit more fun with it, I think.
And that is, at the end of the day, I think what everyone should be doing more of is just having more fun.
It means that you're going to buy more wine, you're going to consume more wine, you're going to buy more diverse types of wine from more diverse regions, and we're going to build a stronger, more sustainable industry that way, because we're going to be reaching out to a huge amount of people out there who desperately want to learn more about wine, that don't even know that there's this great wine out there, but that only go and buy their wine from, Dan Murphy's or Colesville.
Well, I certainly am looking forward to Series 3, where hopefully you'll be coming through Victoria.
We'll try. We were talking with Victoria way back in the day, but they didn't give us too much love. So we'll have to, hopefully now the show's got a bit of a track record, the door may be slightly more ajar for us.
Well, I don't doubt it. But thank you so much, Nathan, for making some time. And obviously I'm really looking forward to seeing some more episodes. And hopefully my listeners will jump in as well and follow you on various social media platforms, but just jump onto YouTube and watch the episodes, guys. They are hilarious.
That's great, mate. Thanks very much for having me. It was a real treat.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And as always, thank you very much, guys, for listening to another episode of the Vincast. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please do let me and Nathan know. You can obviously follow me on Instagram and Twitter at IntrepidWino, and the podcast can be found on Twitter at the Vincast. You can like my page on Facebook, facebook.com/IntrepidWino. And as always, come to my website, intrepidwino.com. You'll find all of the previous episodes of the podcast, as well as lots of different writings. And it's very easy to leave comments and likes on there. You can subscribe to the podcast, as mentioned, on iTunes, Stitcher, or Player FM. And when you do that, I really would love to hear from you by giving it a rating, possibly writing a review. I do look forward to catching up with you on the next episode. But until next time, bye.